Hello, today we've got Stuart Hayes from Stuart Hayes Leadership coming to join us on the comeback game. Mate, how you doing?
Very well, Barry, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here and on the podcast and to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's been probably 6 months, and we try to catch up on a fairly regular basis, but 6 months, it just seems to go so fast these days.
Well, they say time flies when you're having fun, so... And you've recently moved. I hear you've moved.
Yeah, look, it's funny, I guess I grew up in Melbourne and grew up in the suburbs, and then, as soon as I graduated from uni, I grabbed everything I could hold in my two hands and sprinted to the inner city, and aside from 5 years in Asia, I've lived predominantly in inner Melbourne for the better part of 25 years. So heading back out, it's awesome. A completely different lifestyle. I guess I probably underrated it a little bit, but mostly family reasons. My son's going to high school, so we're moving, and if you're not moving, you're standing still. You're not growing, mate. You know how it goes.
Well, it's an interesting topic. You mentioned, if you're not green and growing, you're up and rotting, right? If you're not moving, you're standing still. And I suppose before we dive down the rabbit hole on that one, who are you? Who's Stuart Hayes? Where have you come from? What is it that you actually do? Why should people listen to you right now? Or probably why should people listen to me? But who are you? Let's.
Yeah, look, why should they listen to me? I guess people can form their own opinion on that. In many ways, I've had a pretty blessed career, and I guess I look at my own career in a couple of different phases. The first phase was coming out of university, getting swept into the global consulting arena. Ultimately at the age of 27, being appointed by the richest man in the world at the time to become the chief executive of a company that was privately owned and a client of the biggest consulting firm on the planet, who I worked for. Mm. So, I went out of consulting and started becoming a CEO at 27, had 3,000 staff, had 100 Gurkha soldiers to protect me and my family and, my staff and assets, I should say, at the time. And, I guess what I knew enough of at the time was that I didn't know anything. And the good thing about working for such a prestigious consulting house was that every 2 or 3 months I would get brought back into a training arena, and I'd be flown across to Chicago, and I'd sit in a room like this one, and there'd be these dudes with knuckles full of NFL rings that I'd never heard of. I don't even know who they were to this day, but they'd talk about leadership, and they'd talk about growth, and they'd talk about cash flow and all the things that mattered, and how do you turn a company around. And that was my bag. I worked in the part of my organisation who specialised in train wrecks and how to save them. And that really launched my career. And I guess after 2.5 years of running companies, living in Asia at the time, and being exposed to this ridiculous lifestyle, and honestly it was ridiculous. It stretched my mind about what wealth is, about what success is. In every capacity, I was faced with the prospect of going back into Hong Kong office, and I just couldn't really do that, mate. I'd been expanded beyond my elastic limit, and instead I came back to Australia and continued being a chief executive, who would go into companies that were in crisis, that were stretched, that were stressed, and I'd start to turn them around. And that probably was something that I'd learned, and I had the theories on it, and I'd practiced it on someone else's payroll. But when you get out there and you're running businesses that are not $10 billion US businesses, but that are, say, doing 10 million turnover or 100 million turnover, it's much smaller, and it's so much more real. And what I found was that the theories and the approaches that I'd used successfully in bigger companies needed to be adjusted. I needed to be much more authentic. I needed to be someone who really led people instead of just coming in, seeing a blueprint and requiring it to happen. And it was probably around that time, I guess, for me, that if I think about when in my life did I get my clearest picture of what real leadership was in that era of just coming back from Asia. I was about 31, I think, and in that next 11 years of running companies as a CEO, company after company after company, and what people needed to turn companies around was not my blueprint. It was my leadership.
Mm.
And not my management, not my authority, but my leadership.
It was interesting, you said something earlier, like, say, 27-year-old kid,
Yeah.
right, pretty much,
Yeah.
you know, put in a position to be CEO of a company owned by, at the time, the richest man in the world, and at that point in time, you were smart enough to know that you didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know anything actually, mate.
You didn't know anything.
I knew enough, you know. I mean, and why did I know enough? Why did I even know that? Was because I'd done enough investment in my own self-development in my early 20s, outside my career, right? So I was working at KPMG, then at Anderson during that first 10 years, and incredible training, technical training about how to do things, but not who to be. So I went outside those organisations to learn what mattered most and what it ultimately got me a CEO seat at 27.
This is such an interesting topic, right? Because the CEO seat wasn't based on specific runs on boards. It wasn't based on skill set. It wasn't even based on a magic blueprint. You were hired by your ability to inspire and influence. Now think about that for a second, right? Because in order for you to get that seat at the table, you had to inspire and influence the richest man in the world.
Well, indirectly.
Indirectly though,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't like you impressed him by your years of acumen and results on boards for companies. You impressed him through your leadership skills. But to kind of come back to what you said just a moment ago as well, is that these people in these organisations you've worked in, they didn't need your blueprint. They didn't need the skill set. They needed your leadership.
They needed my leadership. Yeah.
So what was it about your leadership, right? Because what was it about your leadership that allowed them to buy into that, allowed them to be moved and touched and inspired by that leadership, but B, allowed them to get results? Because ultimately you could lead people, but if they're not getting results, they're not going to last too long, right?
I mean, it's a good question, right? And I feel like I just want to say one more thing about that first role. It was an outstanding role out of left field, but in many ways I think, you know, I paid the price in self-development in every capacity. In public speaking, I learned all about business planning and you know, basically did an MBA on the side in my own time, speed reading, everything that I could to have an edge that would allow me to perform better in the workplace, right? However, really what it did is it got me in the right place at the right time. So that when the opportunity came, I was just in the right place at the right time. You know?
You were ready.
And it came and I got it and I ran with it. And it was because I was available in Asia, smart enough, well regarded enough. The relationship between my firm and the family, you know, the royal family of this country, was sufficient that, you know, I got the seat.
But you earned the seat though. You didn't get the seat given to you. You earned the seat.
And then I paid for it in spades.
Yeah.
I used to have a whole head of hair, mate. But you ask about leadership, about inspiration. You know, it's funny because I think there's a real difference between being a leader and being a manager. And for me, when you're a CEO, you have authority and you've got processes and controls and your rank, and you can make people do things at risk of losing their jobs. Right? However, I mean, we've all experienced this too, right? Like, what's the first thing that happens when you're working for a micromanaging type boss who uses that sort of approach to get you to do stuff? What's the first thing that happens when they take a holiday? Nothing, right? Everyone goes along and just starts wasting time and doing what they want to do in the first place. However, if you inspire people and you motivate people and you
teach
can
people
somehow
to think
and to feel, you know, and you can connect with them with your heart, that's when it's very different. And people choose to follow you, not because they have to, but because they want to.
Yeah.
Because you're doing something that resonates with them, that you know, generally speaking, is making their world or the world better in some way.
Yeah.
And that's really ultimately, for me, what it's all about. You know, it's helping people see the connection between something beautiful in themselves, in the world, and what they're doing in their work every day.
Yeah.
And making that real.
Yeah.
You know, and being authentic and humble, and you know, on the journey, so that you're a real person. You know, you're not this crazy person who's had all the successes in their life. Because I just talked about the first chapter, but you know, I haven't got to the turning point. You know, which really for me was an inevitable correction. You know, for my ego to go through to come back from.
This is what I want to hear, yeah.
You know, and that part of life, I think is, you know, in many ways was the hardest but the most important.
The correction?
The correction.
The defining moment.
So just for some context on that, for any of you watching, if you haven't heard me on anything else before, that first decade was very successful. You know, in fact, probably the first 15 years of my career, everything just flowed. You know, like I found that money came very easily, jobs came very easily, success came, even if I wasn't looking for it, right? And then enter stage left, you know, maybe me really, the protagonist in myself, I don't know, but a business that I'd started in the screen industry actually, since we're looking at screens as we talk here.
TV screens for the viewers.
So we ran I started the first in-store media network in Australia, where we actually put in media screens into stores, and we would make TV and we'd sell it, and we'd sell advertising. So we were in 150 locations around Melbourne, and you know we'd put this thing together, and what you see these days in pharmacies in particular is exactly the vision that we were doing 15 years ago. But we just didn't have the cash flow. We had early cash flow, couldn't sustain it. The thing, you know, it just was a damn mess, to be honest, mate. You know, I learned more about that period of deciding to, do I hang on to this thing or do I let it go, about myself and about myself as a leader, than at any other point in my life. And the outcome of it was that I decided to leave no stone unturned, and ultimately to absorb the debt from the thing when we did close it. So it cleaned me out, you know, it cleaned my wife and I out completely, and left me with, you know, with a 1-year-old child, a shit car, no job, no business, and the last $247,000 of debt, which, you know, rather than let the business go bankrupt, I felt that's what I wanted to take, you know, so I took it. You know, do I regret that? Sometimes, you know, for sure, you know, I mean, you know, I've essentially paid off the equivalent of 8 house deposits before we could get anywhere really advanced in recovering financially from it. But the real thing for me, the reason that I regard that period, which was so painful, and really still staggered that my marriage survived it. You know, Rani was not happy at all. Our relationship was stretched for a long, long time. But actually what happened was that I started to ask much better questions of myself, and I learned that I guess I was being a CEO for many reasons. One of them was that I loved it, and I loved the esteem of it. You know, I loved being a CEO and being a leader, and it was, you know, my ego loved it. But actually, I really didn't love the job that much. You know, what I loved the most was actually working with people and connecting with people, and specifically working with the emerging leadership teams. You know, the Gen Y kids at the time who, you know. So I had this mantra when I was a CEO that emerged out of this, which was, if you want my job, then come in early and I'll teach you everything you need to know to take it. And that's sort of how I started down the path of leadership training. The other thing that happened that was really beautiful, really, was that even though I'd come from this background of dealing with companies in trouble financially and helping them turn around, I'd had no compassion for these people. You know. I didn't really understand their situation. I couldn't feel it. You know, I could logically project and think about it, but I never felt it. You know, and I don't know about you, but you know, when you've actually stood in someone's shoes and you can feel the pain that they've gone through because you've gone through it, man, you know, that changed everything. And so for the first time, really, I think in my career, I could feel people, and that empathy, that compassion was so transformational for me. And I just, you know, the grip of my ego really started to shift and change. And you know, meditation, heart-based meditation, was something that I found around that time, and it was the game changer.
I want to touch on. Thanks very much for sharing that. I could feel that there's still, you know, a little bit of rawness about that, and I think it's beautiful. The one thing I want to share, or just come back to, which I think is really important, I suppose, what what really inspired us to start up this podcast the way that we have is around, you mentioned that you learnt more. You felt that you learnt more through that challenging period of your life than what you had prior to that. And I think this is a really important point to just dig a little bit deeper to, because, you know, we work with so many business owners every day of the week, and I speak to so many of them that are experiencing so much pain, but many of them aren't able to see the blessing in that. They're not able to see the lessons because they're too caught up in the pain, which is easy when you're there, right? Like when you're there, that's all you know. But, you know, I believe that we're always kind of given, in many ways, we're never given anything that we can't handle, right? Now, you could have continued to go on the way that you went on, but you most likely wouldn't have experienced the beautiful opportunity to learn the compassion, the beautiful opportunity to connect with people and to feel people and to experience that other side of life that you now have as a result of going through that pain. And I think that, you know, how would we ever know, how would we ever be able to experience the light if we haven't been able to experience the dark? And I think that's one thing that people often miss in life is that, you know, you can't get rich collecting one-sided coins. You have to be able to experience and acknowledge and appreciate and accept, in many ways, both sides of life. But it's through mastering both sides of life that I think we truly master life itself.
Very wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think for me, how that would show up before, you know, that correctional era, if you like, was denial. You know, and really, you know, I run a lot of my clients through psych tests these days to help them with self-awareness, right? Because self-awareness absolutely is the first step to change, right? But for me, I was self-aware. I was self-unaware, you know? And particularly those blind spots would show up around what I wasn't prepared to admit to myself. And, you know, until I could see it and realize it, and then coil back with embarrassment that everyone else knew this about me, but I didn't see it, you know, that this denial, this pattern of not actually taking proper ownership. And for me, you know, denial is like the hallmark of a victim mentality, because you're blaming, you know, you're not actually owning the problem and saying, you know, I caused that, it's me, you know, fails on 23. And then you go about fixing it, but you have to take ownership.
Yeah. I think true transformation starts, like I was sharing this with someone the other day, I think true transformation starts the moment that you can accept all of that is right in the situation, or all of that is the way you'd like it to be, and all that's not.
Yeah.
Right? I think so often, so many people spend, you know, we all do this, a mass amount of energy trying to move away from something. But it's like where your energy goes, you know, where your focus goes, your energy flows, your results show. So if you're trying to move away from something, there's still a certain amount of energy that's focused on that. We can't leave that. Whereas if we choose to love and accept that aspect or that part of ourselves, then we can truly love and accept that other aspect of us as well. You know, I think this is where it's surrendering to all that is and accepting all parts of us that we do experience that feeling of being complete and fulfilled, right? Yeah. Okay.
So and that's hard, you know. That's not an easy thing, you know. Like first step is you're aware of it.
Yeah.
You know. Second step, accept it.
You know? Yeah. And don't misunderstand, for the people out there listening or watching this, don't understand what I'm saying by accepting something. You don't have to, like, if you're in an abusive relationship, you don't have to accept that abuse. What you need to accept is that you are in an abusive relationship, right? That you're making choices or that you're taking actions that's allowing you to stay in an abusive relationship, right? So therefore, there's a level of responsibility that needs to be accepted before you can move on, right? Rather than blaming the other person, because you're equally responsible for being involved in that relationship. So accepting it is not going, hey, this is just the way it's going to be for the rest of my life. Accepting is going, okay, I accept my part to play in this environment, or this situation. I'm now going to make a different decision based on being more in alignment with what I'd like.
Yeah, and alignment, you know, I mean, that sort of brings it back full circle. I mean, we started this conversation with a loose discussion. We might talk about leadership, right? But actually, you know, leadership, personal alignment, you know, spiritual alignment, if you like, really, you know, the more I've gone on my journey, the more I see them as they are all the same thing. You know, it's just that when you're dealing with a large number of people, there's more of them that are all aligned. And in many ways, I was recruiting someone this morning, and that alignment, even in a workplace, it feels really shallow to go to a workplace after the things you were talking about, but for that person who is 25, wanting to join a team to bring their skill set, but in a more expanded type of role, what I've always taken the view of with alignment with people is that, come along with me for a while. And if I can align you to achieve a step towards the greatest dreams of your life, simply because you're working with me for a period, that's a great success. And then if you leave in a month or 3 years, whatever, that's okay. But for that period, we're aligned, we're both walking in the same direction. That's the great thing about working with people. And that's just work alignment, and what you're talking about, Barry, is so much deeper and more important. And who knows, I guess I like to think that great leadership is about being the custodian of the culture and the well-being of the staff. Realistically, if you are really leading your people, and you get that concept, then if they're in an abusive relationship, it's going to come out in some way that you can support and help. Even this is possibly completely inappropriate to talk about, because as a CEO, you're not a qualified counsellor. But actually, as a CEO, you are a coach, you are a salesperson, you are a counsellor, you're selling visions, you're coaching people.
You've got a responsibility too to actively assist your tribe to experience a better quality of life. That's true leadership. But that old military shit that we used to use years ago is out the door, although unfortunately there's still some companies that are modelled that way.
Yeah, there is.
But I think true leadership is, as you said, like embodying the vision and mission values of the organisation, allowing others to meet you there. Inspiring others, helping others to become unstoppable in the organisation, whether it be for, a short period of time, a medium period of time, or a long period of time. I think it's really important. I suppose before we finish things up, is there anything you want to share around that business turnover aspect? Because, there'd be a lot of business owners listening to us or watching us out there at the moment that are possibly not exactly where they'd like to be in their businesses now.
This is the most beautiful thing. I was introduced on stage one day as a guy who turns around companies with heart, not hatchet. Which was for me one of the coolest things I could possibly ever have been introduced as. And really, why that was the case is that that person had heard a few stories about the way that I approach turnarounds of businesses. And so if you are watching out there and you've got a business that's a bit stretched or staff that are a bit stressed, then don't forget actually that above everything else, these people that you employ, they are every capacity you have to turn around and transform your business. And the big mistake that people make time and again is that when things are tough, they cut costs, right?
Yeah.
And what they do is they cut staff, because staff are expensive, right? But when you cut staff, you cut capability. And you cut the ability, when you cut capability, you're cutting out the ability to grow, to turn around, right? So there's no surprise that after 27 years of voluntary administrations in Australia, that only 6% of companies have ever survived them, because in a voluntary administration, you cut costs, you push the thing back out to market again, and you try to say, it's all fine, but it's not. Instead, what you need to do is you need to engage your staff. You need to capture their hearts and minds, paint that picture of the future that's compelling, that's inspiring, that's world-changing, and find out how you can align those people towards that. Motivate them, inspire them, hold them accountable, for sure. Bring in coaches, make sure that they're aligned and they're doing their best every day. But at the end of the day, it's your ability to become the custodian of the culture of the team. And for me, it's always been about how can I create an era in which the people that work in this organisation will look back upon for the rest of their lives, and they will love it, and it will be the greatest period they've ever worked in. And if you're walking across the street from one of those people, you'll get to have a situation like I've experienced, where someone has skidded their car almost to a halt, or jumped out of their car window to come and hug you because of what you gave them in that period that they got to work with you, and because of how you made them feel. And when you do that, those people, no matter how disengaged you thought they were, and how close to sacking them you were, they turn around and they deliver outcomes that transcend belief. That's the beautiful thing, you know. That's why I do what I do these days, you know. I want to help people create those eras, and when I do, and even as I guess I could say that I'm an outsider, but I don't feel like I'm an outsider. I feel like I'm in it, and it's beautiful, you know. It's connecting people. So if you want to take anything away from this interview, and you have got a troubled business, I mean, why would you wait till you're troubled? You know, I mean, my challenge out to all my business clients now, you know, just bring in the era, make it a place that people love, get the most out of them. You know? I mean, you're paying great wages to most people. Why wouldn't you at least get your value from the wage, let alone 2 or 3 times that when they're really engaged?
Yeah. People won't remember what you've said, but how you make them feel.
It's very true.
Yeah. Stuart Hayes, you're definitely a man of big heart. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. It's good that we could catch up again.
It's great to see you, Barry.
Appreciate what you do and appreciate what you do to the world. Anyone out there that might want to reach out or resonate with you, how can they find you?
Google Stuart Hayes Leadership. Otherwise, come through you, mate.
Yeah.
Either way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much for your time.
Great to see you, Barry.
Cheers. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.